parts at the beginning. Thank you for coming, everyone. We've got some really good speakers here today, and it seems as if this is a really important week, and lots of really good discussions have happened so far. So hopefully we'll get a lot out of today as well. So first up, you're going to have me just doing an overview, and then we'll move on to some probably better speakers. So we've got Gareth Williams, who's here. Gareth's going to be the environmental health, or started as an environmental health officer, and has worked in the sector for 18 years, and now is managing an investment programme for Carmarthen County Council. We've also got Solitaire Pritchard and James Williams, who are going to do a joint discussion on the work that Pobble's doing with around over 600 homes on the retrofit. And then we've also got Lisa Holt, who I think is actually on here as Laura Holt, but her name is Lisa. So correct me if I'm wrong there.
It's the other way around. I'm Laura.
Oh, you're Laura, sorry. That was a good start, isn't it? So Laura's from Swansea University, and she's going to be talking about the work that she's doing there with regards to residents and involvement. Great, okay. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So, as I said, just an introduction. My name's Martin Ford, and I'm one of the board members for TPAS, and I'm actually giving David a rest from his busy week this week, so stepping in to help him out. So I'm just going to kind of give a summary, really, and some considerations for the sessions. I'm not going to give answers, but I'm going to give my thoughts as a TPAS board member and someone that's quite passionate about residents' involvement. And obviously, this session is about talking about retrofit. So you'll see the key header there is that it's going to happen. And I've had various different conversations with senior members in Welsh Government, and actually this is where we are. Retrofit is going to happen. Now, I could say that retrofit is about focusing on existing properties across Wales, not new builds, and how can we make homes more efficient and fit for the future in relation to climate change, and be done with it. But actually, it's not just about that. It's about making sure that we've got the right processes in place to engage with our residents. Now, one of the really, really key considerations for me, certainly with TPAS and with my role in CCHA, is that these are people's homes, and we absolutely need to be considering this as we're going forward. We need to consider that every property individually, with the tenant living there, and they're at the heart of the decisions that we make. And we need that balance. We need that balance of, we've got to do this work. It's going to happen with properties. We've got to decarbonize homes. We've got to make them more energy efficient, but somebody's living there. And Martin, it may say...
Martin, sorry, can I just interrupt? You're on display mode, presenter mode. If you just click that arrow under display settings on your screen, you'll probably go into... duplicate size show. It should make it easier for people to see.
There we go. Can everybody see that?
Sorry.
Okay, great. So the problem is I can't see where the slide is now, David.
Okay. I'm not sure. Okay, you'll have to go back then. Yeah. It's going to happen, if that helps.
Right, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to start again. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Everybody see it? Great. Okay, so thanks for that, David. So these are people's homes, and it may sound like an impossible task for people that work in property to balance that people and property aspect. But while new systems are required, what we have to remember is that people need to be able to live with them and use them. And one other thing for me with regards to being people's homes is that, you know, whilst we are looking for it to a degree with property as a one size fits all, for some properties that may work, but it may not work for the people that are living in them. And we need to remember that at all times. And it's really important that everyone understands what it means. You know, I've put on here about staff, contractors, communities, residents. You know, the question we need to put those questions out there. What is retrofit? You know, and retrofit is about conducting the whole home surveys, taking into account the fabric, the materials of the property. But we need to make sure that everyone understands what that means when we're doing it. And what are the benefits to this? Everyone needs to understand what the benefits are to be able to communicate them, making sure that the languages are absolutely clear and that everyone understands it. And one big thing for me, which I keep on saying to myself, is do people understand decarbonisation? You know, do people get climate change, but do they understand that term? And there's been some really good work that's been carried out by TPAS, and certainly with the TPAS voice. And one thing that I've kind of picked up over the last week, and just as a small plug for TPAS, there's a report that you can find on the website, which is a survey that's been done with regards to climate change and decarbonisation, and I'd absolutely recommend everybody looks at it. But one of the things in terms of one of the key points that I picked out of it is that 61% of tenants felt their most trusted source of information was actually the manufacturer. Wasn't necessarily us as housing professionals. Actually, they want to understand information from the manufacturers, which surprised me as a housing professional. I'm sure it will probably surprise others, but we need to be listening to those things. And the other point I've picked up is that 47% of people preferred face-to-face conversation. So again, going back to the language, how do we communicate that information? Early engagement, you know, for me is absolutely key, and not just for me, for residents. We need to make sure residents are aware of the entire process. You know, this retrofit process. What does it mean for them? You know, we start with the home survey. We need to explain that. There's then a case of data analysis. We're planning for solutions based on that data. Then we've got the installations. We've got training for the use of systems. What are the future requirements of servicing? And we need to be clear with those things at the very, very start. You know, do we need to be going in to service systems on an annual, biannual, 5-yearly basis? And we need to be absolutely clear, and we need that engagement with people. And we need to keep in touch. You know, it's not just about the here and now, it's about keeping in touch in the future. You know, we've got lots of work going on with regards to resident engagement, but actually we need to make sure that later on, we're making sure these things are still working for people. And we need to, as part of the keeping in touch, it's about evaluating the data with the people that live in those homes, and looking at the performance measures and communicating those with people and saying exactly what it means. And all of that comes down to managing expectation. Sharing of information and data, and I've touched on it, you know, we cannot assume that tenants don't understand the data and the information. You know, from the report that TPAS has recently done and for other reports that have been carried out, people want to see the information. They want to know what's going on within their home. People know their homes best, and they can tell you how it's working. And we need to translate it to something that's easy to understand. And, you know, certainly within the housing sector, we like to put leaflets together and so on, but we don't have to just stick with those things. It doesn't have to be written down. As we said from the tenant voice survey that's been carried out, over 60% of tenants like that face-to-face contact, and actually they want to be speaking with the manufacturers. So let's get the manufacturers involved. Use images is another thing. We need to make sure that we're using images, not just words. And we need to be doing talks about it, not just to the individuals, but also to the entire communities. Looking at hiring out community centres, getting some stands up and getting people out into the communities and having these conversations and sharing that information together. I touched on what does future servicing mean. People need to know, and they also need to know why it's important to keep them safe, and also to make sure that we're able to manage their energy bills and so on. Providing tenants with a full and long-term impact at the start, and that kind of goes back to the early engagement. We need to be taking people on a journey with us, and this needs to be a collective journey. And finally, just to kind of touch on it, is about sharing the benefits. We need to be picking up that social value element. We need to bring groups of people together. Don't just focus on one property at a time. We need to look at it on a wider scale, making sure that we're engaging with everyone within the community so that people can share their experiences, and we need to learn from it. And we need to be thinking about how we share our learning with staff, residents, and contractors. Think about having community champions, people that kind of really get this stuff, people that really like it, really want to be involved in it, and they're the kind of support within the communities that people can go to and have conversations with, if they're not too sure and they're uncomfortable with anything. And how do we get the most from our contracts? And this comes down to the social value stuff, the community benefits work that everyone does. But one of the things that's come out of all of the reports and the Better Homes, Better Wells document is that we need to make sure that we're keeping this local. We do want to focus on local employment, local support, local development of people. So, and I touch on using community centres, spaces for display and plans, just as you would for new builds. And that's the key thing for the retrofit. We're not looking at new builds for retrofit. We're looking at retrofitting, reshaping existing homes to make sure they're fit for the future for decarbonisation. And you can you see in the community centres that you've got plans for new builds. Let's do this for the retrofit program. And I just wanted to finally pick up something that Julie James said in her statement last November, and for me this absolutely rings true. And what she says is communities will also have a vital role to play. We will not succeed in our endeavours if we seek to impose solutions on people. This programme will work with people to find the right solutions for the home and the residents, leading the way in decarbonising Welsh homes. And that kind of rings true for everything with me. So that's enough of my Bristolian tones. And do we have any questions? No?
At the moment, we haven't had any in the Q&A box. I've got quite a few I want to ask you, but I want to see if it comes up in other sessions first.
Okay. There we go. So next I'm going to pass over to, hang on, I'm just bringing my list back up. Next is over to Solitaire and James.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for that really useful, interesting overview of the world of retrofit in, obviously, the housing sector. So James is going to kindly share a presentation that we've just put together. Just to give people some idea about this project, I'm sure everybody has heard of it now. I'm sure everybody's sick to death of hearing about it probably, but it's a really significant project for Pobl, obviously, and I know for 02. So just to give you an overview of how it came to be, I'll just kind of put into context of where this project sits in one of our key regen areas, which is Penderry and Swansea. So the backstory to Penderry is it's where Pobble has the greatest concentration of its homes in Swansea. So it's 700 of our homes are based there, sat amongst 1,200 local authority homes. We've got a huge strategic development site to the north of the estate. Lots of local authority owned housing revenue land within the community, commercial land, many development sites, and abundance of green infrastructure. So this became our key regen area, and the beauty of this area and all of these opportunities, it's brought together a really significant master plan for the area. So instead of looking inward at our own community, we've looked at how does this touch the wider Penderry ward. Now within this, at early doors as well, we had this very embryonic project in development with WEFO for some ERDF funding, and we kind of stepped into that, having invested in a pilot project of 6 properties within this community. So we'd invested ourselves in six properties, kind of touching on what you said, Martin, to kind of gauge people's feel, because the other side of this is as well, sometimes this technology can be talked about in a way that seems quite frightening and intrusive and different, and it's going to impact on their life every day and be a nuisance. And we kind of wanted to dispel a bit of that myth, having worked with some consultants and manufacturers around this is all behind the scenes, you won't need to see it, it won't interfere with people's daily lives. So the pilot project served as a really great opportunity for us to see how the customers interacted with this, how long it took to install, how disruptive it was, and obviously then the gains and how people felt about it. So as you'll see on that slide there, there's one of our customers in Penderry who benefited from the first phase of the pilot. So whilst that was great, they always felt like there was something missing in this project, and that's when then Zero had started to work with Pobble on one of its very new development sites at Park Iron. And James kind of came into the party and talked about how we can make this more. Obviously, we wanted to scale it up across all of our homes in this community. And with that, we've now got a system where we're looking at aggregating and socialising all of these homes as well. But I'll allow James to talk about the detail in that. So for Pobble, what does it mean? So this is £7 million of funding secured through WEFO, £1 million of investment from Pobble. We've got some money from the Swansea-based City Deal. I'm not going to underestimate it. It's a very complex programme, and I think James would probably agree we've hit many an interesting obstacle. So for example, now every home in Penderry is having a full rewire to accommodate this technology. This was not planned. So again, this is additional input and expenditure by Pobble, which is great. Obviously, we want this system to work to its best ability. So it's a very complicated project. I take on board everything you've said, Martin, around the customer involvement in this, and we've done our best, and we feel we're doing our best around really early engagement with this. And this is the beauty of it sitting in a wider regen ambition as well, because we're also talking about the wider regen ambition. We regularly give updates around this project and where it's at. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there, this is just an example of some of the newsletters that we send out now, just an update about the project, where we are, when we'll be coming to see you. Trust as well, again, is interesting. You talked about trust, Martin, and that's a huge indicator for Pobble. We use a trust indicator. We want to see how this project improves that, hopefully. And again, in terms of the face-to-face approach that you talked about, what we've invested in again in Pobble is a community building, which is one of our properties that will be converted into. It's a collaboration space and a hub, so that the energy project is in the heart of the community. So this will be a place that people can go to. They can go and see and touch the technology if they want to, put a drill through it. We've had lots of people saying, you know, what happens if you did hit it with a hammer or put a drill through it, or if your repairs guys come in and do that, what's the consequences? So we want people to feel safe with this technology in their home as well. So everything you say, I think, absolutely true. And this is a huge learning journey for all of us. And as you talk about the learning in this, I think it's across the sector. And that's another part of this project, is the sharing of the knowledge with the sector. And that's actually one of the outcomes in this project, is how do we disseminate from this project so that it does help scale up further. And as you say, on large scale rather than piece by piece. So huge massive project for us, really proud of it. I shall hand over to James to talk about the tech side of this.
Thank you, Sol. Good morning, everyone. I'm James. I'm co-founder, CEO of Cero. Very, very proud to be sponsoring the Decarb Week with TPAS this week. It's part of our message really that this has to be this transition has to be something that benefits tenants. I've always been one to say that net zero, achieving our carbon emissions reduction over the next 30 years isn't something that should be done to us. It's something that we should be benefiting from, and living in a healthier way with lower costs and an overall a better customer experience. So Cero was really we're on a mission to retrofit and to upgrade to both our new and existing homes, but take customers and tenants on the journey with us as we do that. So to dive into the Penderry project then from a technology point of view. So this project is really all about electricity, but it sets a foundation that in time could be expanded to things like heating and hot water as well. But the first phase of the project is really all about how do you reduce the carbon impact of electricity in our homes. So it's really in the home. It's doing three things. It's retrofitting solar panels to as many roofs as viably possible in that area. Of course, there will be some rooftops that are not suitable for solar, and I'll touch on that later on. Pretty much every single property is going to get their own battery. And I'll go into detail of explaining why that is. There's a picture there that's from one of our new build sites of a battery installation within the home. And then the third element is controls and smart controls as well. But this isn't all about. This is catering for all types of users as well. Those who want to use a device or a phone to control their home. Those who don't, we have solutions for that as well. It's really about taking all customers on a journey with us. So why put this equipment in? So firstly, of course, with the solar panels, what we're trying to do is generate as much energy as possible within that community, and simply reducing the amount that needs to be purchased from the grid. So of course, energy generated off the rooftop, zero carbon electricity within the home. That's kind of the first step. Now, historically, with solar panel installations, you use it or you lose it. And in the past, there's been government programs that have paid you for that electricity that you've basically sold back to the grid in the middle of the day. So if you're not using it, if you're not home when the solar is generating, it would be exported back to the energy grid. Now, those regimes have come to an end, and actually the most valuable thing you can do with that electricity is store it in the home to use it later on, because on average, electricity that you buy from the grid is worth around 3 or 4 times more than when you sell it back. So clearly we want to keep as much of that in the home as possible. So that's the kind of primary function of the battery. Now, there's also what we're looking to do on this project is share energy within the community as well. So this is really to address that. Some homes will be very easy to upgrade. They might have the perfect south-facing roof, but actually, what do you do then when there's a home around the corner that has a complicated roof or a big tree in the way or points north? Does that tenant then get no benefit, from this sort of investment in this community? So what we're doing here in Penderry is looking at how you socialize all of the generation off the rooftops so that every member of the community can benefit from this investment. And reducing that risk of inequality that comes because some homes will be easier than others, or some homes more suitable than others to upgrade. We're going to be really clever about when we buy electricity. and I've got a slide on that coming up next. But it's really, and then so there's a big focus on reducing costs, addressing fuel poverty for tenants. But then also from the landlord's perspective, when what we're doing is we're using more and more what we would say green energy on the grid. Now, you may not be aware, but when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, or actually at times when everyone else isn't using the grid, it's typically greener, much lower in carbon emissions. And that's the times that we need to harvest as much electricity as possible by storing it within the home or using it, consuming that energy. So, and of course, this project to help Pobble as landlord achieve their carbon reduction targets. So just talk about electricity pricing for a moment, because it was only yesterday that the regulator announced that within 5 years' time, every domestic customer will have half-hourly settlement on their electricity costs. Now, there's a long the electricity industry is horrifically complex, but most people pay a fixed rate for their electricity, but that's 15 pence per kilowatt hour, 16 pence. Most people will pay a flat rate. The reality of electricity is that it's constantly changing in price in the background. And actually, most of the time, it's a lot cheaper than what we pay for it. So the opportunity that these projects have, and when with the battery systems installed, is that those tenants can now trade essentially, stop using the grid at the peak time highlighted in grey on there when electricity is expensive, and use it then at a different time of day. And so that's the opportunity that comes. We can save 3 or 4 times the cost of electricity by shifting our consumption. And also, if we can change our behaviors, we can save even more, of course, as well. So one of the other things this project would be doing is working together, and we call this aggregation, but working together, all of those battery systems working together could actually replicate what I've put a picture of in the bottom left, which is at the moment part of the solution to storing wind and solar is to put big piles of batteries in containers on our grid system. Now, we could actually replicate that by digitally, virtually linking all these batteries together. The grid will see the homes in the same way as it sees that containers full of batteries. So it's an opportunity again for the home to generate additional value that will help the landlord invest, and it will help the community save money on their bills. As I said, I want to talk about the tenant experience. It's really important to us. So we actually have what we call our Cero Life, which is actually a customer-facing part of our business. And we don't sell kilowatts because it's 2021, and I can't believe we still sell kilowatts as pence per kilowatt hour, when many other industries, whether it's television or mobile, have created better experiences for customers. So what we talk about comfort, which is how warm your home is, how much hot water you have, and how much electricity you're using, and maybe in time how many miles you might go in an electric vehicle. So in the background, we are essentially purchasing that energy. So when I showed you that graph of a changing of electricity changing price, now I'm not expecting people to watch that every half an hour of the day and start running around the house doing things. Essentially, that's our job in this project. You tell us how you want to live. We run around in the background making sure that actually we're buying the cheapest electricity we can possibly buy to give you that comfort. And that requires data, and that requires intelligence in how those battery systems, whether they're charging at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, whether they're selling back to the grid because you don't need to use all the energy stored in that battery. But the last and really important piece is the customer experience, customer service element of it. So in providing comfort to a tenant, we're there to support that comfort. How can we reduce energy costs? Where are, if somebody has a particularly high bill, why is that? How can we help them reduce that cost. We kind of use the old example of somebody might think it's cheaper to plug an electric heater in the lounge to stay warm rather than turning the heating on. Quite often that isn't the cheapest way to stay warm. So we can really help to have those conversations with customers and support. It comes back to what Martin said about wanting to hear from manufacturers. Well, we're really a kind of conduit through to the system and how it works and how it works for the tenant. And we feel that this is a really important part of making the customer experience better for tenants. And that's the end of everything I was going to tell you. So thank you.
Can I just come back in there just quickly as well? What I did overlook as well, it's something Martin picked up on, which was social value, obviously through procurement. We've recently just closed the tender exercise for this project, and there was a significant request in that tender for community benefit and social value, specifically concentrating on the Penderry community. So there were very bespoke asks as well that have come through the tender. It's really good to see how those companies have responded to that.
I think that's a fascinating subject, and I know TPAS company themselves are very keen to explore this further. I might be back in touch with you on that, actually. That's good to hear. It's good to hear.
Good. Thank you, Solitaire and James. I think one thing I've certainly picked up from this, and I know, is that we need to be clear that we're at the learning stages now. We don't have all the answers to retrofit, and these are projects that we're trialing at the moment, which is really important. And hopefully we'll get some of the answers. James, I wonder if you're able to unshare your screen. Thank you. Right, there are a number of questions in here which I do want to touch on. Otherwise, we'll get to the end and we'll have lots. So we've got one. Well, I'll start at the top. So, what about homes that can't be brought up to standard? Will they get a rent discount? I can't answer that. But that may be something that may be a consideration for later on. I don't know. I can't answer that specifically. David, you're looking as if you know.
No, I've seen some discussions already. Certainly one large landlord in Wales, they're only talking about 4 properties they've identified right from the beginning, going, it's historic, listings, things like that. They're never going to be able to retrofit that properly. And they've already said, we'll look at trying to do some sort of discount for them because they're not going to get the benefits of, but that's coming part of the surveying of properties at the moment, I believe.
Yeah.
There's no more about,
And it is a really important point to make because, knowing the demographic of the properties in Wales, we've got a lot of pre-1919s, we've got Valleys properties. And, for us to say that we are going to get zero carbon for those properties would be wrong because actually, we're looking to reduce the carbon. But there's going to have to be some really heavy investments to get them to zero. So, okay. There's no mention of cost. Maybe we'll pick up some cost later on. How long will it take to retrofit all of Wales? I don't know if I'm in a position to answer that. I don't know if anybody else has got an answer, but we've got this retrofit program in at the moment, which is a trial. We're taking learning from that, and that will kind of set us going for certainly for the next 10 years. So we're looking up to 2030, and then as a government agenda, we're looking to have zero carbon by 2050. So I don't have an answer for retrofitting the whole of Wales, but I've got no doubts that we will be working on every property up until 2050. James, this is one for you. What's the average cost of batteries installed?
So it varies really depending on how much storage you want, but if around 3,000 to 3,500, we're seeing costs come down considerably with the larger projects and tenders that we've been running. But that equivalent battery of that size of 10 years ago would have been 5-6 times that. So it's really still continuing on the sort of cost curve coming down.
Okay, I always use the example of it's like flat screen tellies. When flat screen tellies came out, they were really expensive, and now because they're a mass production and they've become the norm, they've reduced, haven't they? Why not force electric companies to fit meters that go backwards to store the energy on the grid? It would be much more efficient than using batteries. There's a lot of work that's going on with energy companies. I know that, and problem is, as James said, they are a beast in their own right at the moment. And I know there's a lot of lobbying going on with Welsh Government, and Welsh Government are working on it as well. But I think it's a case of watching this space with the energy companies.
Should I just
jump
in very
James?
quickly on that one, Martin? Yeah. I mean, with electricity, there's only really a small number of ways to store it. So, you know, you can store it as potential energy, which is pumped hydro, where you store it in a lake at the top of a mountain, or in a big pendulum down a mine shaft, or something like that, which is all very expensive, and we don't really have the option to do that. So batteries are really the solution for storing electricity. Now, they're either going to end up in a pile in a field next to a substation, or they're going to end up in the home. And actually, we'll see a blend. And actually, the battery provides the way that we meter homes. Putting these batteries behind the meter in homes actually provides a lot of benefit from a cost perspective to the tenant that you quite often lose when you put them at a substation. So right now it's a good way to both save money for tenants and to support the grid at the same time.
There's a couple of other questions here whilst you're there, James. So we've got questions about maximum battery life.
So the honest answer to that is most of them don't know, because they've been running them on multiple cycles ever since they built them. So they're warranted typically 10, 12 years, and we expect their life to be 18 to 20 years, but it will reduce over time. So much like your iPhone might only last for a few hours now, several years later, there is a degradation over time. Great.
Okay, thank you. We've got a comment here about ventilation systems not being serviced yearly. I would suggest probably having that conversation with your landlord and just checking when it is due to be serviced. Who will get the money back when you sell the energy from the batteries? So James or Solitaire, did you want to pick that up?
So the part of the project obviously is passing the benefit to the customer, but also as well then it's collecting those profits for a community share, I guess, is how we want to phrase it. We're still discussing how that is best distributed amongst the community. So there are a number of options. Again, James will probably be able to talk to you about some of the opportunities we could do for customers who are on prepayment meters, and how we work with those customers and how they get benefit, or how the community collection can benefit customers on that system. But also, if there is a community pooled pot, how would the community like to see that distributed? So would that be a kind of green fund for the wider region areas, so looking at the green infrastructure, the projects that communities are passionate about, or versus is it a case that we have an emergency fund for customers when they just need some help?
Great, thank you. There were two other questions which I just want to pick up on, which I'd answered in the text, but I don't know if everyone's seen. So there was a question on whether decarbonisation will be part of WHQS. I think we can categorically say yes, it will be. There will be parts of decarbonisation that will be included as part of it, and I've been on groups myself where we're in the process of working with Welsh Government to finalise what WHQS looks like now compared to what it was from whenever it started, 2009. It was a long time ago. So it's being reviewed as we speak. There was a further question which I just wanted to pick up. Where's it gone? Oh, it was about sharing the information. So, and I think Solitaire, you'll be able to kind of agree that, you know, there's, with the Zero Group, we've got, correct me if I'm wrong, James, 27 housing associations or housing providers that are working with the Zero Group. There's the strategic group, which is in place, which meets, what's the frequency, James?
I think it's monthly, yeah, at the moment. Yeah.
And then there's multiple working groups, which include resident involvement as one of them. And then you've got the board, and within all of those groups, all of the best practices and sharing of information is shared amongst the housing providers, so that as a collective across the whole of Wales, we learn as we go. And I think, you know, I go back to the point that I raised earlier, is that this is, you know, we need to be clear, this is a learning point where as to where we are at the moment. Okay, good. I'm going to move on now. Gareth, I'm going to pass over to you.
Morning, everybody. Hi. Is somebody going to be sharing the presentation, or do I need to share it?
It's better if you share it because you're in control of it. But if you have any technical issues, I'll bring it up on my screen.
There you go. Could you bring it up on your screen, please, Dave? I'm having some technical issues.
No problem.
Thanks.
We've lost your camera now, Gareth, so I don't know if you're able to, there we go.
I'll start whilst David's bringing that up on screen. So thanks for the chance of coming and speak to you this morning about how I think as a collective we meet that target of decarbonising our social housing stock by 2030. It's a really ambitious target, but I don't think it's one either to be feared of. And as social landlords, we're in a position to be able to rise to that challenge and lead the way for Wales. And, you know, the question was raised earlier about how does this compare to rolling the programme out across the rest of Wales? Well, this will give a good foundation, won't it, going forward, and reducing those costs for the private sector to be able to participate in the decarbonisation agenda. And whilst I think most social landlords are relatively clear on the direction that we're going in and the direction of Welsh Government in terms of the Welsh Quality Home Standard, is that it will feature in that new version. How we get there or achieve this isn't quite as clear yet. And, you know, as a local authority, and we're not part of the Zero consortium that's been doing the work, we are really interested to find out or take the learning from that and see how that develops and how that can fit in with our future programmes. So there's a lot of work going on a national and a local level, and not just through the forums that we've mentioned previously. You know, we've got the homes as power stations in the southwest region of the country. So I'm hoping that I've pitched this at the right level and picking up some of the points or the themes that was touched upon in the introduction by Martin. And I sincerely hope that as I go through my part and other information that you receive from other presenters, that you'll have a fair idea of what housing decarbonisation is and what it means to you as tenants. What I'd like to do first is give some background on how social landlords, more particularly Carmarthenshire, have developed standards over the past 10 to 15 years, and more particularly the role of the tenant. I'm pretty sure that you'll all be familiar with the Welsh Housing Quality Standard and how that was first developed in Carmarthenshire, and on the back of that we developed the Carmarthenshire Home Standard and managed to reach full compliance on that in 2015, well in advance of the Welsh Government targets. This was developed with our tenants and they underpin everything that we do, and not too dissimilar to any other social landlord. It wasn't to devalue the Welsh Housing Quality Standard, it was done to reflect our tenants' choice, and I think that's really important going forward with this and the and any future programs, is that we listen to our tenants and what they require and need. In terms of decarbonisation and pushing the standards even higher, it's important that we know where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going to. Once we understand and evaluate that, then we can determine how we're going to achieve it and those work programs. If you can pull up the first slide, please, Dave. So if you look at the table and the graph that you see there, this shows that our compliance data in Carmarthenshire, and we've achieved 90% compliance in improving standards in our homes. Of the 10% of homes that aren't compliant, the majority of which are through tenants' choice. Broken down further, it tends to be older people who have lived in those properties for many years that don't want those actual improvements. You also see that we've achieved high compliance levels in terms of energy performance of our homes. And the reason why I'm showing you this particular slide is that if we want to make the rollout of decarbonisation effective, we must have high participation levels from you as tenants, so that you help influence and deliver on the standards. Can't rest on our laurels. Good sporting analogy is that we're only as good as our last game. So without you, this won't succeed. And what we have to do is make sure that this is equitable for you by demonstrating that, you know, that it's affordable around affordable warmth, as well as contributing to the climate crisis and making sure that it's value for money. So there has to be an equal balance in all three of those elements for this to be successful. I think it's been mentioned, it was mentioned by Solitaire earlier, confidence is absolutely key. And dare I say it, a lot of people, including our tenants, may lose confidence because of the time it takes to deliver schemes or the quality at the end. And we've seen this happen with things like cavity wall insulation and dampness in the past. And for example, the detailing around external wall insulation, we have to get those things right. It's also around education and values and how we measure, how these measures will help tackle carbon emissions and about being environmentally conscious. So that's about, you know, engagement with our tenants. If you can move on to slide 2, please. So Carmarthenshire has about 9,130 houses, and I think that kind of demonstrates the magnitude of this of this project or the agenda. The key characteristics of our housing stock is something that we, and I would imagine other social landlords, will be looking at as part of this. In Carmarthenshire, our main housing stock type is post-war semi-detached housing of typical construction. We have about 8% of our housing stock which is non-traditional. So that's our prefab buildings, Cornish type or steel framed. And I think James said earlier, you may think, well, that's easy. If you've got a certain archetype, you put certain measures in place or you do similar work. Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. And every home will be slightly different from the way that they face, the orientation to the way to where they're located, and whether they've had any alterations like extensions. Little things like cut flaps indoors may influence the energy performance of a building and what retrofit measures we install. We then need to link those to our cyclical maintenance programs. And what that will do is that it'll avoid disruption, abortive works, and unnecessary costs going forward. I think, that's reflected in our tenants' rents and how effective we are at spending money to make sure that those rent increases every year that our tenants have are kept to a minimal. If you can bring up the third slide, please. So this shows how our homes are currently performing. And it's not too dissimilar to other Welsh social landlords, because that's what the WHQS required us to do, is to meet, is for all of our homes to be above a 65 SAP rating. So SAP is a simple way, it's not actually a simple, there's a lot of calculation behind it, but it's a method used to measure the performance or the efficiency of a home, taking into consideration all the individual elements and their performance, their U values, putting those together and coming up with a specific rating. So A being the most efficient and G being the worst performing. So the SAP of our homes is about 66 SAP on average. So that's a D rating. We've done things like cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, window replacement and condensing boilers in the past. Anticipated target, which we think will be in the new Welsh quality home standard, is 92 SAP rating. So that's an A rating. So essentially that graph there needs to push right to the top. And to get to that, we'll have to do further retrofit measures like increasing the wall and loft insulation, renewable innovative technologies, and hopefully over time, like James has mentioned, is that the grid itself becomes cleaner, and those retrofit measures. So for example, at year 1, it would be a deep retrofit if we wanted compliance. At year 10, it may look completely different, with the retrofit measures being reflective of how the grid has responded to that. Consistency comes in what we're trying to achieve, then actually what we're actually doing in those homes. So each property will have different retrofit measures based on its individual characteristics and how it's surveyed. So your neighbours may have something completely different to what you have, or vice versa, but the end result will be the same, and that's making sure that your home falls within that A rating band. All of our new build sites in Carmarthenshire achieve about a 95 to 105 SAP rating, which is really, really efficient and affordable. So that there's no inequality across our housing stock, we believe that all social housing providers are obligated to bring their existing stock up to the same standard. We can move on to slide 4, please. So in Carmarthenshire, a lot of our properties are off gas because of the rural nature of the county. 75% of our stock have mains gas, 24% are oil. And you can see from that table, only across our entire stock, we only have one heat pump across the whole county. So that says a lot in how our tenants are heating their homes and what we need to do. The darker blue areas show the greatest concentration of properties that are off gas, and it's fair to assume that these will be where we prioritise the retrofit programme first and install things like air or ground source heat pumps that will have an immediate positive impact on carbon emissions and affordability around heating those homes. We'll move on to the 5th slide, please. So we've been working with Cardiff University and the Active Building Centre. I know Laura's on the forum as well as Welsh Government, to model and pilot some retrofit schemes. So essentially, that's all retrofit is finding the best solution for each home that achieves an A rating that's affordable and feasible in terms of cost. So that's where the optimized part of it comes from. Essentially, we could remove all of our gas and solid fuel boilers tomorrow and put in renewable technologies. Probably bankrupt all of our RSLs, but we know that this would be really costly to you as tenants in terms of electric and heating costs, because first we need to insulate the homes sufficiently, and secondly we need to allow the grid to respond and almost meet us halfway as well. So it has to be a fabric first approach, otherwise all that energy that you'll be producing will be lost or wasted, or it'll be extremely expensive at certain parts of the day. The measures listed are things that we've been trialling to see what can be achieved and if the standard can be met. And with those measures, we expect to see about 71% reduction in carbon and about 63% savings in fuel bills. And that's where I think that equity comes into it, is that is equitable for the environment and for you as tenants. However, the retrofit measures are very expensive, and it would be remiss not to acknowledge that. Demonstrating and communicating this to our tenants will promote and drive up participation. It's logical that if we get the retrofit right, the greater the participation, the greater the impact will be on a local and national level. We've also started thinking about things like embodied carbon as well, and that's carbon that's stored as part of the manufacturing process or created through our activities. And we spoke about the social values earlier and community benefits, and this is something that needs to be part of our procurement and tendering strategies, is that we start getting our contractors to think in different ways about how they work. And a good example of that, it would be absolutely crazy to pull out all of our boilers at this stage, which are compliant, they're working well, to replace them with other innovative technologies which would add to the carbon footprint. So for all the good work that we'd be doing in the retrofit and making those homes efficient, we'd offset that by our activities and creating more carbon than what's needed. And this needs to be linked into the condition of our housing stock over time. When you consider the scale of what we need to do as well, it will also create a pipeline of work. So hopefully that'll be allocated to local contractors, and that will help stimulate our local economies, help with the recovery efforts in the aftermath of COVID, and bring prosperity to our communities. I think I'm up against time here, so if you can go on to slide 6 quickly. And this has been covered by James and Solitaire anyway in quite a bit of detail, but I thought I'd give you a quick understanding of what our view is of the IES system. And it's essentially a remote monitoring system that's capable of capturing the property's performance based on changes in the external and internal environments of that home, and how that responds, or how the different technologies that we've installed responds. So it's a bit more sophisticated than a smart meter, but very similar. Sensors will be installed over the through the property, And eventually what I'd like to see, you know, this is being branded as a monitoring system at the moment, as particularly as part of our retrofit program. But what I'd like to see is that this system is being developed to react to consumption and the demand on the grid at different times of the day or the year. But more importantly, what we feel like it'll do is help us support our tenants to use those technologies effectively. In terms of a way forward, and all social landlords will be at different stages in this, but as a way forward in Carmarthenshire, we're hoping to have developed our decarbonisation strategy by August of this year. We're busy modelling that programme and profiling the costs with the Welsh School of Architecture and the work that we're doing with the Active Building Centre, and making sure that our tenants aren't guinea pigs, you know, that we get this right and deliver it to a high standard and a high quality right from the start, and that it's on time and on budget. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Gareth. There are some questions that we have. I've got one question for you, actually, and it was more so about, with the work that you're doing, how have you engaged everyone else in the organisation?
Well, we've got our corporate decarbonisation team who will lead on. You know, Carmarthenshire is quite, in terms of authorities, it's been quite ambitious. So we've set the net zero target across the whole public service. So it's not just focused on the housing decarbonisation. So there's a clear goal there to reach those net zero targets by 2030 across all of our services. And that makes it doesn't make it easier for us, but it gives us the right direction. It's recognised at a very high level. Our local members are engaged in the process. They understand what the what we're trying to achieve, and you know, we're working through that now with these pilot schemes, working with our tenants to be able to demonstrate that it will work. So I think it, you know, in terms of our governance structure in the council, and again, it shouldn't be dissimilar to other stock retaining authorities, is that is recognised at a really high level now. You know, I know Swansea in particular, Neath Talbot, Pembrokeshire are all part of the Swansea Bay City deal and the homes as power stations. So that's become a well-rehearsed argument and a good forum to drive these things forward. The skills and talents that we require locally to be able to, you know, implement a lot of these measures has to be developed through the local colleges, through the construction industry training board.
Yep.
And getting, you know, that's one of the biggest problems that I think we'll face, and it's not just local to Carmarthenshire, is that you know, I read recently in a green recovery report that over 700,000 labourers are at retirement age.
Yep.
So actually passing those skills on to the new labour workforce and making sure that those skills are appropriate going forward. So the mechanical and electrical skills that are required for new technologies, they need to be there right from the start, and that pipeline of work needs to run simultaneously with that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're either going to fizzle out or they're going to move their business elsewhere. And the other thing to acknowledge is that it's a very homogenous industry, isn't it?
Mm.
Is that, you know, there's a way, there's, you know, in terms of unemployment and everything like that, there's a way here that, you know, we can make it equal, that the LGBT communities are getting more involved in the construction work. Our tenants are getting more as we go on to estates, that we're creating apprenticeships, and that our young residents or tenants see the value in getting involved in that.
And I think that's a valid point. And David, I'll come to your question in a second. But I certainly know there's a question in the chat, as to whether we have enough contractors, and I think you've kind of answered it. And my answer would be no. We don't have enough contractors to carry out this work that we, potentially will be planning to do over the next 10, 20, 30 years. But you're right, there is an absolute need for us to be developing people now in preparation for all of this work coming. And I know that colleges are starting. I think I saw last week that there's a decarbonisation or a college course that's being developed, which is great, brilliant news. But there are, we need some of these people now, and I know from my side that we are struggling with skilled tradespeople because we've had that gap in between, haven't we? So you're right. I'm just going to move on to David. David, you had your hand up. You've taken it down, and you're muted.
Sorry, I wanted to ask Gareth and maybe James, what are the rural considerations? Because, I love Carmarthenshire, try getting a phone signal there at certain parts of the county. Is that a factor with all these smart homes or homes that are off grid? How do you tap into the grid if they're not even on the grid in the first place? I might be a bit of a county here, but sorry.
I think maybe James can offer a more technical view on this, but in terms of Carmarthenshire, yeah, you're right. In terms of broadband connection, it is very hit and miss, and there's a big infrastructure program going on now through the Swansea Bay City deal to make sure that broadband is accessible to all of our residents in the county and further west. But the way that technology is moving is that we're becoming even more reliant on that remote access, aren't we? And I think the IES systems will depend entirely on being able to connect to that. And the type of IES that we've installed in the retrofit schemes are based on SIMs. So there is a move. Generally, there's a move towards making broadband accessible to all, and that's not just for decarbonisation. You look at a lot of our tenants who are on universal credit. They need to be accessing that portal to be able to manage that effectively. And in rural Carmarthenshire, we need to make sure that our tenants can engage properly with whatever service.
Surely even SIM technology would have some issues in parts of Carmarthenshire or other parts.
It would. So those are challenges that we're trying to overcome.
Yeah, it's certainly in an area we need to look at. In terms of broadband, it also comes down to affordability for residents, doesn't it? A reliance on people, having it, and we know that not everyone is able to afford it. James,
I was just gonna draw some parallels with the smart meter rollout. So there's something like 96% coverage of homes in the UK with smart meters, of course, have to connect through kind of 4G signals in order to share the data that's needed for your electricity supplier to trade the electricity in your home. So it is quite high actually coverage, and they've achieved that through lots of different communications providers, and I believe in some areas of the UK quite some other more creative ways of getting communications with that home. I think one of the key considerations will be what happens if that communication fails. Now, we can't see any effect on the tenant. We can't have things stop working just because the communication has failed. And quite a lot of what we talk about is a resilience in the event that comms isn't working. but the ability to kind of reconnect, just to account for that sort of uncertainty in some areas. But I think it's between broadband and cellular, we'll see quite a good coverage, and there will always be the exception, of course.
Yeah. Great. Right. I just want to, there's some questions in the chat. James, you're going to pick up about the shared flats and solar panels.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're looking at a couple of new solutions now. One of the issues historically with flats has been that the solar panels have fed the landlord communal areas, and most of that has then spilled out onto the grid without really any benefit to the residents in the apartment block. There are new ways we can meter those buildings, so we could essentially have, the building having one meter point rather than all the individual flats, which then allows you to use all the solar within the building before you start to before you export it, before you start to buy electricity. So there are solutions for flats, technically are different, but we can still bring those sort of communal benefits of generation and renewables to blocks of flats.
Great, thank you. Right, I'm going to whip through these questions because I'm keen to get Laura going. So we've got a question here. Do we need to know what we will need, as in solar panels or ground source heat, or do you just tell us? Well, this ties in with the home survey, doesn't it? And we will come in to go to tenants' properties and carry out the survey, and it will give us recommendations on what's needed to reduce carbon in that property. So, I'd say leave it to the professionals. We're not expecting people to know what's needed. We will come in and work with you. And it goes back to my original points that we've got to work with you on this and explain what that home survey is, what it does, what it means, and so on. Okay. Will I need to move out of my house when all this is done? Where will I go if I do? And who will tell me how to use the technology in the property? Well, it depends on the work that's being carried out. There may be circumstances where people do need to decant, but I think, it's in all of our interests that people do stay in their homes. But it depends on what work's needed. So I couldn't be very specific on that. But and in terms of training, I've got absolutely no doubt that anybody who's working on the Zero project and any others will go through the training of the systems with you. Oh, and there's a question here about the whole house system with linked duct systems. How do you feel about the disruption to a home? Well, again, that comes down to a conversation with the person who's living there. There are certain things that are going to be recommended. There will be to sit here and say there won't be any disruption would be wrong of me, because there will be elements of disruption for some people. But again, it comes down to the housing provider, the landlords, to be working with tenants and having those open conversations about what's expected, what's coming, and how those housing associations and housing providers are going to support, would be my answer to that. Okay, last but not least, moving on to Laura, who's going to talk to us about the work that she's doing.
Yes, hello. Let me just share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yeah. I don't know if you wanted to. Oh, there we go. That's better. Yeah.
Yeah, great, fabulous. So, hi everybody. I'm Laura Holt. So I work on a project called ABC, which is the Active Building Centre Research Programme. So we're a huge research programme across 10 universities, funded by central government. But I'm going to talk to you today about the work we're doing at the Swansea University and Cardiff universities. So what we're looking at finding out, we've all been talking here about the potential benefits of retrofit. So where are the actual research teams finding out what these benefits are? So we're looking at the benefits to your health, well-being, finances, and we also want to find out what's important to you in your houses, how you use your energy, how this changes over time, what you like or dislike about perhaps new energies that have come into your houses. So we also want to look at kind of what information you've been told, how useful was it? So sort of a lot of these questions that are coming up in the chat now, we want to kind of find out the answers to these questions and help you basically. So if you already live in a low carbon home, or your house has been retrofitted, or you've been asked if you want to take part in a scheme, or you've decided not to take part, then we want to talk to you and we want you to get involved in our research. So how we're going to do this is, well, there'll either be a short survey, so it takes 20 minutes online, or we can post it to you. Or you may be asked if you want to get involved in a longer interview, so we can have a more in-depth discussion about how you're living and how you're feeling. And then also, if you are asked to take part in an interview, we might ask you to keep track of a diary of daily practices, so how you're using certain things and how this changes over time. Okay. So as I mentioned before, so the benefits of low carbon living. So the questions we're kind of looking at here around health are, well, does it improve your health? Does it improve our health? This can also be your mental health and well-being, as well as your physical health. Are we more comfortable in the houses? And then if you look at the social, so there's been talk here about the social value and the impact towards like the wider community. So our research team will actually be conducting a social return on investment. So that's basically finding out the value to society, not just the financial value. So can we create thriving communities? Can we improve our social connections? And can we change the way we use our energy? And then finally, we'll be looking at the finances. So household savings, can it save us money on our bills? So you might be thinking, so what? Why is it important that you take part in our research? You know, you probably sent surveys all the time asking for feedback. So why should you take part in our research? So, well, basically, you get to have your say. So we're an impartial research organization. So you can say, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, what you like, what you don't like, and everything's important to us. So you can basically say whatever. Secondly, you can have a real impact, because our research, the idea is our research will feed directly into policy and design and come up with guidance basically on the best way to basically go about decarbonising homes in the UK. So you can really have an impact with anything that you say to us. And this can then shape the future of housing. Also importantly, you can help to tackle climate change. But finally, the most important thing is that it's led by you. I mean, we need you. We can't conduct this research on our own. We need you to help us. And it's really important that the kind of change in housing landscape is actually led by the people who will be living in the homes, not people designing the tech. So yeah, that's kind of really important for us. So if you're already part of the Retrofit project, or you know, you might have been signed up, you might have heard about it, maybe your neighbours are, then you might have seen interest forms that have been kind of shared around the place. So if you have got one of these, then please fill it out, send it back to us, or you can email it back to us. Or if you don't have that, or you haven't taken part in a scheme yet, or perhaps, you know, you definitely wouldn't want to take part in a scheme, or you just want to kind of get a bit more information out of us, then you can go on our website, which is abc-rp.com. So you can fill in a contact us form there, which will basically get in touch with you then and see how you can get involved with us. Or here's our contact information here. So we're a really friendly bunch of people. So there's myself, there's Kate from Cardiff University, and there's Deb from Swansea University. So you can email us directly or give us a ring directly and just, yeah, get in touch, because we really want to hear from you. Great. That's me, short and sweet.
Thank you, Laura. We don't have any questions for you. I'm sure David's got one up his sleeve somewhere. No, he hasn't.
I was just stuffing a biscuit in my mouth.
Oh, sorry.
Finished quicker than expected. Sorry.
Laura, can you just run through the different ways that people can contact you? So we've got email, telephone.
Yeah, email, personal email, telephone. Obviously, you'll share the slide with everybody.
Social media.
No.
Social media, pigeon, paper airplane. Anyway, any which way. And our surveys, our interviews can be done over the phone, online, video call. We've had to adapt, obviously, because of COVID. So
yep.
Any which way you can think of, we can get in touch with you and vice versa. So yeah, hopefully presentation can be shared around. So it's just basically just get in touch. Even if you hate the idea of retrofit and don't ever want it done to your house, then we want to know.
Yeah, and we want to know why. You know, we need to understand it so that we can plan all of this stuff, you know, better as we go through. So so I would actively encourage that anybody that's involved in it does get in contact with Laura and her team. James?
I was just going to ask whether we think retrofit's the right term, because actually what we're talking about here is upgrades. You know, we're creating a better living environment. Should we be calling it home upgrades? You know, would that engage tenants in a better way? I feel like the retrofit term is underselling really what's going on here, which is improving homes.
I agree, and I think it comes down to the language that we use, and we need to get that right. And you know, putting something out there that's been decided by local authorities or governments may not necessarily sit comfortably with people. I think my view is that over time, these will become part of those planned programs that people are aware of. And actually, we may not be using the term retrofit. It's just part of what we do. As WHQS became part of what we do, and we knew that ongoing works, kitchens, bathrooms, boiler replacements, and so on, were all part of the program. So I think naturally over time, it will change. Gareth?
Yeah, sorry, I think you picked up on it earlier, didn't you, Martin, that, you know, tenants were more interested in the manufacturer's specification on how those individual elements were performing, rather than us as a social housing providers. And I think it goes back to that issue around confidence. And you know, if we want our tenants to be confident that everything that we do is of the best quality and that we meet those standards, we have to brand it properly in the first place. And I think James's point is completely valid, is that optimized retrofit needs to have a meaning, and it is more than just going back and doing something we should have done. It's actually upgrading the property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. David?
You're right about the term. I've worried about this recently when we look at this week's theme and what people are coming to and what people understand. And I've realized we might, you know, by just using retrofit all the time, a term we're used to using, that we may have, I do think that does need to be looked at. You know, what is the best terms for this? So yeah, that's definitely, and I'd be keen to, you know, we have a big tenant panel, 1,500 tenants, you know, at our disposal by something called Tenant Pulse, which Pobble are the sponsor of. And the, you know, in terms of going out there, we could test some of these terms and try them out with people, you know. But yeah, that was just what I was going to say.
Yeah, maybe if people want to drop them into the question and answers now, we can put them in the pot. James.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to jump in on the manufacturer point. I think we have to recognise at the moment that manufacturers are actually failing the end customer because they're thinking about their product and their product only. So to give you a really good example of that, the new build site that we're doing with Pobble at Park Iron, had we not been involved in that project, that customer would have had 5 different mobile applications to use just to live in that home. You know, that's not a good outcome for customers. So actually, I think there's a big issue at the moment where, you know, everybody is selling a product and a service that's tied to that product, and nobody's really thinking about how it all works together for the tenant. Well, nobody else, I should say, is thinking about how it really works for the customer as a home. You know, you have a car, it works like a car. It might have been assembled by, you know, your air conditioning might be from Bosch and your other bits, your stereo from Sony, but it works like a car. You know, you don't have to do different things to work different parts of it. The home should be the same.
Yeah. And also on that, this comes down to the procurement for me. That's the social value stuff. And if we're procuring contracts, materials contracts, supply chain contracts, then actually there's an expectation that we have for our residents. And, you know, yes, you're right. At the moment, for a material cost or a material supply chain is about getting the products out there, isn't it? But actually, you know, we need, if we're going to put these contracts together, these tenders together, then it needs to include social value. And that expectation that we have as service providers is that if we're going to be procuring these materials with you, we have an expectation that you're going to support us by going through how to use these systems with our residents. You know, clearly the report that's being carried out says over 60%, 67%, I think it was 61. You know, 61% of people would prefer to hear it from the manufacturers. You know, we've got to listen to that stuff, and this isn't just a localized survey. You know, this was done across the board, and we need to kind of take all of those things into account. I'm not too sure whose hand was up first, but I'll go with Gareth.
I think we've done a bit of work on this already with the Active Building Centre, Sun, in ABC around embodied carbon. I mentioned it earlier, and that's a real rabbit's hole, is that how far down that do you go on when we're looking at environmental product declarations, which is what the manufacturers produce to show how they process or the cost of the process on carbon. And you know, you look at things like batteries and other elements, they're sourced from, you know, those elements that make up that actual product come from all parts of the world. Yeah, so it's how far you go down that rabbit hole to say, right, okay, this is you know, this isn't an environmentally friendly product. We need to source it more locally. We need to manufacture it more locally, and there are possibilities around that, you know. But it's the appetite to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. David, then I've got a question in the chat.
I just wanted to bring back that thing about where to get information from. It's partly why we've got to rethink when we doing installations now. So I recently had a boiler that came with all sorts of smart panel and almost a mini computer came with it. The contractor was gone, you know, at the end of the job. They just wanted to get going, and that was the end of it. So I had to go to the manufacturer. Actually, in my case, I didn't think the manufacturer had enough information to explain to me. And I found something wonderful on YouTube by a plumber that just explained how to use this system. And I think going back and being able to access YouTube videos or video resource or guides, I think that's going to become more and more important when we're putting these type of technologies in now. Or factor in time to teach the tenant at point of installation as well, rather than it's Friday afternoon, job's nearly done, you know, let's get going. So I just think there's a bit more we need to think about that process. Yeah.
Yep, great. I'm just going to pick up some of the points in the chat. Are there any examples of where it hasn't worked? I'm not going to answer that one. I'm going to put it out to the panel and see who's going to put their hands up, because I'm sure there are cases.
I don't have a specific one, but I can tell you in the last sort of 3 years of working with social landlords, I've heard a number of times things like we've had to take the ground source heat pumps back out, you know, that because the tenants were cold. You know, we've heard these we've heard of like heating controls being removed because they were too complicated, or so I think it does happen. I don't have specific examples myself. Maybe Sol does, but I think that we've heard this time and time and time again, and it's all due to the fact that the biggest failure point is quite often the handover. Like you say, contractor goes on the Friday afternoon. It's then down to the tenant to operate the system, and that support is just not there. And that's we really have to address that.
Yeah, and also just on the back of that, some of my experiences is that we've tried to fix these things in pieces, and actually the whole home survey, puts everything together and puts a clear plan together. We've gone out where I've been in the past. We've gone out and done EWI and everything else, but actually that's not the only solution. So by having that whole home picture, certainly helps. Gareth.
I think there's two elements to that, isn't there? There was one, we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've done previously around some of the measures that we'd installed in the past. And we know that there were some horror stories around cavity wall insulation and dampness issues and condensation issues in properties where they weren't ventilated properly. And when we put our bid into Welsh Government around the optimised retrofit, we included mechanical ventilation heat recovery system in that. Okay, and we felt that was an essential part of retrofit, of optimized retrofit, because if we're doing all these insulative measures on a property, then we need to make sure that the air quality within that home, Laura mentioned it just now, around the health and well-being of our tenants, that is a key component of making sure they're healthy. But it wasn't considered as part of the retrofit, but we see that as essential. So it's about what we learn from those things and making sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes again. But then it comes down to education as well. And we've seen with some of the pilot schemes that we've run, where the comparison consumption costs for a tenant who's had, innovative technologies put into their homes and somebody who's on oil or on gas, they're saving quite a considerable amount every year. But the temptation was, for example, we can work out that we put in a ground source heat pump in one of our pilots, and the savings to that tenant weren't as great as what we'd expected. And we found out that instead of running the ambient temperature at around 19-20 degrees C, the tenant had put the temperature up to 25 degrees. So actually, they were still saving money, but the benefit could have been much more if they'd have kept the ambient temperature the same as what they were used to. So there was a change of perception there. There was a change of attitude. So that's where the education comes into it. And likewise, what we need to make sure of is that take an air source heat pump, for example. If we install an air source heat pump in the depths of winter in December, for example, then that is going to be a particularly expensive period of the year to run that air source heat pump. And I would imagine that there'd be quite a bit of discontent, or the assumption that that's going to be their heating bills. It's actually not, because over the period of a year, and we probably have to go through two periods to be able to evaluate that properly, of the effectiveness of that heat pump. But actually, over the term of a year, that should be a significant saving, particularly during the warmer months. So it's not to look at it in isolation at that one particular point in time. It's to look at it over the duration of that installation, or a particular period of the year.
Yep, great. Thank you. David, you had your hand up, but you put it back down. No? Okay. I'm just going to go to the questions, and I think unless we get any more, then we might wrap up. So I've got a question here, I think, from my fellow board member. I'm assuming it's the same person, Amanda Lawrence. Sorry, my screen's just started flicking. Tenants need to be visibly included in future plans, absolutely. As at the moment, it does feel as if we're being forgotten as tenants. As plans are made at government level without being included. Yes, I agree, and this has been raised. It's great that this is changing, but these properties logged as numbers are homes. I absolutely agree, and I made that point at the very beginning that these are people's homes, not just properties, and we need to find that balance between the two. And retrofit is essential. Oh, it's just moved. But being told what's going to happen without feeling we have a choice will just hurt. And, I think I'm quite comfortable to sit here to say that I had that conversation. I think David was in the meeting with me, where I made it clear to someone in Welsh Government that these are people's homes and people need a choice. A choice to a degree, because this is a government political agenda of which it is going to affect all of us, not just social housing. There is work, and I've responded to a question earlier. There is work going on with the private rented sector as well at the moment, and there's trials that are happening. So we will start to see that kind of move. And I don't know if Laura, you've been working with Welsh Government on that as well. Yeah, she's saying yes, I think.
Right, yeah, that's just starting. So yeah,
yeah. Okay.
So got that Amanda's point as well. We weren't sure at what point. It's why we ran it this week, was because there's lots of conversations going on in the sector, and we felt tenants needed to be part of these conversations. But our plan as TPAS is to, if we get enough interest, to run this again, but start bringing in tenant stories into this. Start bringing in more tenants' experiences of retrofit, of the early people who tested, and having those conversations. So, we'll reevaluate at the end of the week, but that's my plan, is to try and do stuff in the future with those tenant experiences.
Yeah. And yes, and as I've kind of said a couple of times today, this is the trial, and a part of that trial is the tenant's experience, and we've got to make it real. At some point, we're going to have to do a larger evaluation and feedback. So so get in contact with Laura. Right, there are some more questions coming in, so I'm just going to quickly whiz through these. So have there been any damp issues? I'm not aware of any, and ideally the aim is to eliminate damp issues as part of the retrofit. So unless anybody jumps in, but I think the ultimate goal is not to have damp issues. Are we inviting manufacturers to engage with residents? Well, that touches on some of the stuff that we've discussed today, and I think we need to make sure that we include that as part of the supply chain packages that we put together. Should all tenants go on pay-as-you-go smart meter tariff with the chosen energy supplier? I don't think that's a requirement, but James?
No, I think what we expect to see at Penderry is quite a large number of the customers already on prepayment tariffs. My personal view of prepayment tariffs is they're not helpful for controlling energy spend, and they could be so much better. So we have some plans in play specifically to launch at Penderry to create a genuinely useful pay-as-you-go tariff that has some intelligence sat behind it. So, to give you an example of that, being able to turn your thermostat down and seeing the day that the credit will run out, go out by a day. So you can really start to control that energy spend with actual behavior change. So I think there's a lot we can do to make prepayment better. But we are seeing, I think it's a real priority for us because of the number of tenants that we will see on those tariffs. But there will be no requirement to switch, but it should be a choice. Yeah, that's the.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one final question that I'm going to just put out there, or it might be a point. Just, does this work on assuming an ambient temperature? Comfort for many is 22 to 24. I think in part the temperature is going to be slightly less that you kind of need to, is the ambient temperature.
Yeah, I think this is linked to the we're talking about setting comfort in terms of controlling energy cost. So essentially, the comfort is whatever the tenant sets it at. So at the Park Iron project for our live customers now, they will set whatever comfort level they want, and the system will respond to deliver them that. Just something that Gareth said earlier about running air source heating through the winter. I was gonna jump in on that one earlier and say this is where changing the way we buy electricity is really important, because heat pumps tend to run for longer periods to create the warmth. So if you, let's say you have a 7 o'clock in the morning, you want your rooms to be warm, that may come on a few hours earlier, but actually electricity is really cheap then. So we can actually, by buying electricity in a more intelligent way and running heat pumps over a longer period, we can actually reduce the cost of using electrified heating like heat pumps over gas, actually. And we'll be able to evidence that from the schemes that we're running already. So we can create a win-win scenario here, which is quite tough with gas because it's so cheap.
Great, thank you. There is one final question, and I wanted to make sure that I answer every question. The reason I've left it to the end is because I don't know the answer, but I'm hoping that someone on the panel might be able to help. What will the impact on leaseholders be, i.e. Potential major works bills? Oh, thanks. So does anybody have an answer on that or any experience of that?
All I would say is that we saw some of this after Grenfell. There are processes in place for landlords, freeholders to recover costs from leaseholders. It goes back to the size. Sometimes it's not worth the effort. So we saw that in Grenfell. One landlord needed to put sprinklers in, and the time and consultation to consult with everybody and start trying to build them and serve the right paperwork wasn't worth the effort of just putting it in as a central cost. It meant those leaseholders effectively got those things free, which I wasn't that comfortable with. But it goes back to the economic cost of each case, I think. I'm not qualified. That's just my personal opinion.
I think within optimized retrofit, there is the opportunity to look at whole streets and whole communities and bring leaseholders along as well as part of the program. But clearly, it's something which it clearly will bring benefits to that particular leaseholder. So it's been thought of in the programs that have been structured so far.
Yeah, great. Liz Gibbons, also a TPAS board member. We seem to be flooding this event. Leaseholder Advisory Service is also a great source of information on this topic. Thank you, Liz. Gareth, do you want to jump in on that one?
I think the point that I was going to make is that it needs to be fair, and making sure that where we are, like James said there, where we are talking about large scheme renewal works on sites or streets, is that there are benefits in the economies of scale there, and that we bring those leaseholders along with us, and that they have the same opportunity to benefit from those works as what our tenant. And that doesn't necessarily mean leaseholders, it means the private sector as well, because a lot of our estates now, particularly in local authority, are mixed tenure estates. So if like I said earlier, majority of our stock is semi-detached, it would, putting aside the decarbonisation agenda for a moment and looking at placemaking initiatives and making sites environmentally and aesthetically pleasing, is you need that uniform, don't you, to create those places. And I think we bring leaseholders and the private sector along with us as we're going through this work programme.
Great, thank you, Gareth. And just one final point is that there's been lots of comments or questions in the chat about, will my rents go up because of this? I think the answer is pretty much no. We've got local rent policies that we've got to work towards. We are governed by the rents that we can apply to tenants, and what is happening is that we're looking at different funding streams to be able to fund this work, whether it's looking at grants from Welsh Government or elsewhere. But in terms of rents, whilst rents can go up by whatever percentage it is at that point of time, there are caps on that, and we can't go past those as housing providers. So this in no way should affect people's rents going up significantly past what those thresholds already set at. Okay. Oh, I've just answered that. I answered it without even realising about service charges. That applies as well. Great. Okay. Thank you everyone for who's spoken today. I think we've covered a big, wider ranging area than I expected today, to be honest. So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel. Thank you to David for being on hand for IT issues, which I think we got past. On that, I will close this session. It's been a pleasure. Please make sure you do sign up to, however, before you go, please make sure you do sign up to the final 2 days of this week if you can, because there are some really interesting topics coming up in the next 2 days.